Today we're talking about how to build your visual identity through video. I'm stoked on this topic. I could go on for weeks about this. So I'm very excited to jump in. So before we actually get into what is a visual identity and everything, about a month ago, we had another training on camera presence, which can be found in school, in the classroom, under the magnetic on camera section. And within that training, we talked about the 4 levels of on camera presence and how the ultimate goal is to get to level 4, the most advanced, which is being yourself on video while simultaneously seamlessly incorporating best video practices. So it's coming across as fully yourself on camera and still incorporating best video practices or having a high video IQ. And what precisely does best video practices mean? In my opinion, best video practices are making conscious, strategic, and true to self decisions about your presence and appearance on camera that ultimately better set up your videos to succeed. So it might be being a little bit more loud or performative on camera, but still feeling like, oh, I'm staying true to my personality here. I usually wear all black, and that actually looks better against a stark white background versus an all black background on video. It's maintaining your true identity, but still optimizing for your video's performance. And so when that is incorporated into your visual identity on video, got to get into what is a visual identity. And it's essentially just your look. It's how people perceive you and your look as a character on video. And your look is made up of what I call identifiers to your audience. And visual identifiers can be so many different things, but they show up consistently in your video content. So this is a list of some identifiers. If there are anything else that you can think of that I don't have on this list, please drop it in the chat. But a signature background could be one, a color that shows up in your videos consistently or something you always wear, hairstyles, your color grading techniques, the camera movement that comes up in your videos, any jewelry or accessories that you wear all the time. I know I don't go a day without wearing my gold hoops. The caption styling that shows up in post-production, because those can be very distinct to you and your brand, and the body language that you run with in your videos. So just looking at this list, I want you guys to try to identify what are your top visual identifiers now, if you can think of any. And if there are any that I have missed here that you feel, oh, I don't see this on the list, but I know this is one for me, please share that as well. But visual identifiers are essentially just giving your viewers, your audience, something to latch onto and come to expect from you. Because not only is consistency important in all the algorithmic reasons, but consistency is important to give your audience something to expect from you. And, you want to become a heartwarming character to them. So here's some examples of my favorite visual identifiers in pop culture. And we're specifically picking out just a single accessory that will be very familiar to you, or should be at the very least. So if I have these 3 images on screen, and it's essentially just glasses with, hairstyle or 2, it's pretty easy, and in my opinion, because I'm familiar with all these characters, it's pretty easy to identify who each of these people are. We got Harry Potter, Dwight Schrute, Jessica Day, who, if you are a fan of New Girl, it's absolutely fantastic. But this is so iconic because these producers, these writers of these characters repeatedly used their glasses to make character choices. They showed up in all these scenes with these particular glasses that each individual character wore, and they just became a staple for the character that they are. Now, I don't know if any of you wear glasses or something else that is almost a shtick part of your character, but this is easy to develop when you're actually writing a fictional character. With people and in real life folks that you may be watching on the internet, or a character that you're trying to portray for yourself, it can be a little bit more complicated. So let's move into some real life examples of creators who have visual identifiers that show up consistently. So if I show you this image, this is a business person, YouTube personality. Any guesses on who this is? Mark's smiling. You're all smiling.
Is that Gary Vee's hand?
That is Gary Vee's hand. You got it, Gary Vee. And, you know, if you think about it, outside of swearing a lot and making thousands of videos, Gary Vee is kind of just your basic white guy. But he throws up that hand signal in tens of thousands of photos across the internet. No one knows why he started doing it. There isn't really a solid explanation, but it was one thing that distinguished him from all of these other white men trying to make content. You know, it's not the most groundbreaking symbol, but when you see it enough, you're able to just see the hand and know, oh, that's Gary Vee, right? And the few other things that he has heavily associated with his brand, you know, we have the 5. He's the wine guy. He's always wearing Jets gear. He's usually in casual attire, no matter where he is. He's rocking the beanie a lot of times. Like he has created a collection of visual identifiers that you mix this formula all together and you know, oh, it's Gary Vee. It's obviously Gary Vee. And this is one of my favorite tech YouTubers, Sarah Dietschy. And at the beginning of her videos, she always says, hey guys, it's Sarah Dietschy, rhymes with Peachy, because people mispronounce her last name all the time. And because Sarah Dietschy rhymes with Peachy is kind of her opening tagline and closing tagline, actually, she has oriented her entire brand around the peachy color. She has a peach neon sign in the back of all of her videos. And if you were looking at the wide span of tech YouTubers, you know, they all have their distinct little quirks and whatnot. But if you show a peach emoji, everyone knows you're talking about Sarah. And it's just one visual identifier that is so strongly fused with her brand that she was able to build a tech empire off of it. This is Melissa Ben Ishay. Not sure if you're familiar with Baked by Melissa, but she is an entrepreneur and TikToker. She runs a baked goods company and is famous for her colorful, tiny cupcakes that she ships all over the world. But she blew up on TikTok because not only does she share her tiny cupcakes business, but she makes these chopped salads and went viral for the Green Goddess salad a couple of years ago. And she's always wearing some sort of tie-dye. She has a very colorful personal brand. People associate lemons with her, cottage cheese with her, because she is always in her videos making some sort of cottage cheese toast or some sort of dressing for her tiny chopped salads with 2 lemons. So these are just things that they're very true to her and her personality. Like, the woman loves a chopped salad, but people have learned to identify a small chop with Baked by Melissa. And I've yet to try one of her cupcakes. I hear they're delicious. Then we have Emma Chamberlain, who built a whole coffee company because people so heavily associated her with drinking her coffee in her vlogs. She is one of the original raw YouTubers, I would say. She did not shy away from showing the ugly, unattractive moments in her life in her vlogs. She is famous for rotting, which is a gross term that Gen Z has thrown around, but She essentially lives from bed, works from bed, podcasts from bed, and that is, I guess, called rotting. And she also has this other aspect of her that is very, very highly contrasted, where she's invited to red carpet events and she is a fashion icon and cares a lot about fashion and putting different outfits together. And these are all just a collection of visual identifiers that she was able to own. It ran seamlessly into her life, but people know and associate Emma Chamberlain with all of these things. And next is maybe one of my favorites. Got Alex Hormozi. This guy, like, come on. He has maybe the most unique and memeable set of visual identifiers. The nose strip, the beard, the Crocs. He's jacked. He has it figured out. And what's interesting about Hormozi is he's not a creator. He didn't start making content because he was passionate about making content and making things. He's a business person and recognized, like, the people who are really killing it in business, they all have these personal brands. They all are on YouTube that have some sort of video presence. And so he was able to take all of these things that are very unique to him and work them into this shtick of a brand that is now so identifiable, so recognizable. And again, the visual identifiers that this man has cornered, absolutely iconic. And what's funny about Hormozi is he actually didn't start with the Hormozi brand when he had his old company Gym Launch. He recognized the power of visual identifiers for brands. And when he sold Gym Launch, he sold the IP of his mustache because that's how ingrained the Hormozi mustache was to the brand. So the guy has recognized the value of visual identifiers for forever. So when he actually came around and started making all this content for himself, he knew kind of how to go about it. But no one comes close, in my opinion, to the GOAT of visual identifiers, Casey Neistat. My God, when this guy blew up, he had his daily vlogs, which was an amazing feat in and of itself. But everyone had to get the T-shirt with the Casey sunglasses on it. He has sunglasses, the handwriting, the wide shots and haphazard camera movement, boosted board, and his studio, which a lot of people don't really think about their background and their studio as being a super powerful visual identifier for their own brands. But you could show me any one corner isolated of Casey's studio and I would know, oh, that's Casey Neistat's studio. He has shown you every inch of it, and every inch of it is iconic. So he is the GOAT, in my opinion. But again, when it comes to Casey versus Alex in creating these visual identifiers, they come from different backgrounds. Like Casey grew up wanting to make movies. He was a creator, passionate about carving out this brand for himself. And Alex, again, was a business person. So it kind of feels like creators, they're just leaning into what they know to be a lifelong form of expression that they're trying to get out, while business people kind of have to find a shtick to latch themselves to. This is how I like to think about visual identifiers. If someone made a parody of your content, what would they have to include to make it undeniably you? So think about, what is the meme version of myself? And it could be a little harsh truths coming to light. I know for me, if Aaron was responsible for making a meme or a parody of me, he'd be the rock climbing and wearing overalls with my paintbrush, and just he'd do a really good job at it, honestly. But those are some things that when you're thinking about identifying, look at all the paint on my clothes. When you're thinking about what your visual identifiers are and thinking about how do I strengthen them and make them even more overt to my brand, you gotta kind of lean into the parody version of yourself. And that, I never and that is, I think, a good place to start if you're kind of unsure of what your visual identifiers are now. Any questions so far? Comments? Anything that jumps out about your own brand of what your identifiers are?
How deep would you go down this rabbit hole early? Because so like the one that's bothering me that you said, Hannah, is the background, because I hate that I painted this room black, honestly.
Really?
It is not a good visual identifier for my personality. I am much more enthusiastic and like passionate, and like black really tames that. And I'm also like a producer of other shows, so it works in that setting where people trust me because I have like a very studio vibe behind me. But it doesn't actually, when it comes to content creation, I think, go where I wish it would, or where I see content in general going, which I feel like is a lot more light and like airy. And if it was white back here and easier to like manipulate the space, I think it would actually be better. So anyway, I'm just wondering at what, like, how early you should be thinking about this stuff, because some of it feels like it developed over time for these people. Not so much Alex. I think Alex knew what he was doing the second he put on a nose strip. that was the most intentional move of all time. But yeah, just wondering like how you go about doing the, like, if I was memeing myself, I would struggle right now because I don't feel like I even have enough content. I am
right.
Yeah.
That makes total sense. So these things have to flow and integrate with your life, right? Like I know for me, you're rarely gonna see me shoot a video with a plain background. It's usually gonna be right here where I'm sitting, or it's gonna be in front of one of the paintings that I'm working on. And that's just, it's never the same. It's not necessarily consistent, but it's always artistic in some sense. So if you feel like the background that you have now is not an accurate representation of who you are and what you want the brand to be, then change it, like hop on it, change it, but when it makes sense for you. If it's a time constraint or a resources constraint, or you just want to think through it more, then give yourself some time and just continue producing consistently. But I think something that we went through when we were shooting the Piper Rundown, which was years ago, was we shot these episodes 3 times a week talking about different businesses and IPOs happening that week. And for a while there, we shot it in front of a big TV screen in our first office. And we had the Piper Rundown logo in the back with the company logo, and it just worked. And then COVID happened, and we started shooting everything from my living room, which did not fit the vibe of like big business. And it was so totally opposite. But that's what happened. We had to make it work. We put a lot more time and production into the actual graphics and assets that surrounded the video shot, because we realized, okay, we're really lacking in whatever set that we have. So if you do feel like the background currently is not serving your ultimate purposes, then it might be something where you need to think about post-production visual identifiers that will better represent your brand. And if, motion graphics, animations, whatever fonts you're using, the colors that you want most heavily associated with you, that's something to consider if you can't immediately change the physical setting. Does that kind of answer your question?
Totally. And I think like what you've done even with like your font choices is something that I really like appreciate. And I think that's also something we're seeing a lot more of, is like, credit Hormozi, but the reason all those caption apps are so easy now is because they're all just copying his style. And now it's kind of like us all thinking through, well, the visual identity of like what our content looks like. There's a million ways to do it, which I know you're going to go into, but like to me, that is it. It's like, what LUT are you throwing over? What what font are you choosing, and doing that consistently, which is nice because I feel like people were just testing anything that anyone else was doing. So none of their videos were really looking the same. And now everyone's like, well, screw what everybody else is doing. Mine has to look different, which I kind of, as someone who's generally creative, I like love that.
Same. It's really exciting because people still are going by the Hormozi playbook and relying on those captions. And for a while it was the Gary Vee playbook. And, before that everyone was copying Casey Neistat style vlogging. So it's this continuous pattern that eventually everyone hits a point and you're like, okay, but copying everyone else is boring. Like, what's my actual style, and what are the visual identifiers that are unique to me, and how can I lean into those things? So this is one specific thing that definitely, if you are struggling coming up with your own set of identifiers, or you don't even know where to start, ask the people around you, ask the people in your life, what images or words do you most highly associate with me? What's the energy that I bring? Like, how can I narrow this down to the top 10 Benji essentials? Ask the people in your life for that, and ask the Video Guild. We are more than happy to workshop that with you as well. So definitely ask for feedback. But I want to talk briefly about what we have been discussing with the Piper, the Aaron Watson video essays. Aaron is leaning hard into the stash at the moment because if he does not have that little visual identifier, he is just like every other basic white dude talking about geopolitics on the internet in front of a bookshelf, no less. This is a very strategic decision on his part to differentiate himself a little bit. And, we do love the self-awareness. It's a great thing. But, we have the green wall, we have the books, and everything else is relatively consistent. I personally think Aaron is such a fan of Costco. I personally think he should wear Costco merch in every single video. Because I think that would be even more of a visual identifier, but we'll get to that eventually. I want to talk about how to create a unified visual identity with a team behind you, because that is something that we at Piper are personally experiencing some growing pains with that. And I want to be very transparent in what we're going through at the moment. So before we dive into the actual pain points, creating a unified visual identity with a team can boil down to a couple of basic things. One of them is brand guidelines. It's so important for your entire team to have all access to whatever your brand guidelines are, and for those guidelines to be explicit in use cases. So every brand has whatever colors that are associated with them, whatever fonts they use. It's important to have the correct formats for logos. But, your brand can have two different fonts. And if one title font is what's used in your logo, that doesn't necessarily mean that's what you use for the captions in your videos. So being explicit about those differences when you give your team access to the brand guidelines is very important, because it's one person choosing the wrong color or the wrong font in whatever use case, and it creates a disconnect in the overall brand and visual identity. Comics, don't you even joke about that, Courtney. How dare you? Oh, I have said it once and I've said it again. If I catch anyone in the guild using Comic Sans in a serious manner, you're getting booted. No questions asked. But yes, just making sure that your whole team has access to the imagery, graphics, transitions, and animations that you're using, and the appropriate use cases for all of those things, and being very explicit with those use cases. And this can be tough because it might feel like you're limiting your team in certain aspects. I would like to remind everyone that boundaries create, what is it? Erin knows this phrase better than I do. I think it's boundaries or limits create freedom. It's, creatives have their own tastes and their own preferences for how certain things look. And sometimes they don't always align. Like creatives on our team in particular have very different tastes for how color grading should look. And I will show you some examples of 3 videos that are all live on our YouTube channel, and they could not be more different. These are different editors that have made video essays for the Erin Watson YouTube channel. As you can see, the one on the left is very cool, very muted tones. And then Erin's looking like a toasted cookie on the right-hand top one. And then the one on the lower right-hand side is more true to life, I would say, warmer shadows, not going for any crazy cinematic look here, but all of our creatives have different tastes and preferences for how something should look, which is good. You should have, your own preferences that you've established over time as artists, as editors, what have you. But it creates disconnect when we're trying to make a unified visual brand here. So we identified the problem. Too many cooks in the kitchen. We have a lot of editors, and they're all working on these projects and creating beautiful final products of video essays. But our solution was ultimately one person is going to be responsible for the color grading of all video essay footage. And that, fingers crossed, should be working for us in the future, because this is something that we've been dealing with and working through for the last several months of just trying to get one consistent look and ultimately not reaching that look because of creative differences in opinion. But we're on the path to reform that. Ultimately, it comes down to, it's just you. It is you in a somewhat character-like form. And you just have to figure out how to memify yourself and figure out what is the parody of my content. And that's, I would consider to be like a good starting point of figuring out your visual identifiers. That's all I got for today. Any questions?
So I have kind of like an open question. I imagine it did, well, no, I'm not going to give as much. Okay, the question is, I love giving context before just asking it. What keeps playing around in my brain is like finding a balance between like play and then strategy. And I know in the creative process, like you have to shake things up occasionally. And just speaking personally, I'm very much just in a time right now, both personally and then a couple people that I want to like collaborate on some things with. We just got to execute. We just got to like put stuff out there. Just got to press publish. That's where we're at. So full, context. I'm trying to not overthink before starting, but I'm curious, as someone who has published so much and iterated over time, and I've seen how you've both as like HP Media and then also in Piper adjusted like even just like the primary colors that you're using, like a guiding theme. What goes into that process? Is it more organic? Like, we think we need to change, let's do it. Is there research involved? Like, what guides that process for you?
I think so. My answer is going to be different than what I think might be a more business oriented approach to it, because if you're looking at someone like Hormozi, everything he does is very strategic and calculated and more overt than I think what a creator would do. So for me, there's never really any research involved in my creative decisions with Piper or with my own content. It's just, I know what I like. I've been making things for 20 years now.
Yeah.
And so I have my distinct tastes and preferences. And it would never occur to me to stray from those things. But those tastes definitely evolve and change over time. I can't say that this is the art I'll have on my wall even next year, but it'd be a pretty safe bet that like it's the same vibe. It just, when it comes to color palettes and font choices and even editing style, it's really number one, it's just reps and understanding what do I enjoy most, and then what lights me up inside when I think something looks good. And then publishing consistently is like the other thing, because that's the only way people understand you and grow to know your brand as what it is by showing up consistently in some manner and making stuff consistently. So I don't know if that specifically answers your question, but I mean, Courtney is like the queen of creating her own look and visual identifiers on YouTube.
That is literally so funny, because this whole conversation I've been like, oh man, I'm so interested to know what my like vibe is.
But your vibe is your icon picture right now. Like that is your vibe.
I hope you don't mind me jumping in. I know you don't, but yeah. First, hello. Secondly, I just want to say, like, I guess my take on this, because it sounds like you're coming from a place where I was like 3 years ago when I was like just getting started with stuff, is like, I think the question is like, how much effort should I put into like creating a specific thing rather than just like creating? And I remember being like super concerned, like, okay, let's like make a brand, right? And I think that, at least for me, like the brand kind of makes itself if you put the reps in, like Hannah was saying. Something that's been really interesting for me to notice in like 3 years of making things is like, I've created a brand whether I've realized it or not. Like if I go through my videos, I make sandwiches. I never knew that. Which is so funny because like I'm literally holding a wrap in my hand right now as I'm on this conference call. Another thing, like I started wearing more and more yellow, and like to the point where I've literally had conversations of, like, do I even like wearing yellow? Because it just like happened organically over time. So I think like when you're starting off, maybe just make first, and like Hannah said, kind of figure out like what do you actually like. Like you don't really know what you like until you kind of try, and then maybe once you're in it a little bit more is when you can like, I don't know.
Oh yeah, there's
if that makes sense.
Yeah, I would say there's no way to assess what you like and what you don't like if you're not actively producing and creating. And then what's really cool is once you've done that enough, like say you make 10 videos and get them out there, and there's a moment or maybe a phrase or something that you change about video number 8. And you're like, ooh, I love that about whatever I was wearing or how the camera was positioned. I love that angle. It just, you start to pick out, that's something I want to repeat. That's something that feels really good and resonates with me. And the even cooler thing is when your audience starts to pick up on those things too and gives you specific feedback around like, man, I love that background. Like it created some comfort for me in some way or whatever it is. But you just got to start making it.
One thing is helpful. There's this guy I work with right now who came from morning radio, and this is visual identifiers, but we think about it in podcasting a lot with like how people relate to you with what you present, like when you're speaking. So there's like primary and secondary identifiers, and they can change obviously over time. So like for me, I'm a first-time dad. My son's right upstairs. He's 3 months old. This season of my life is definitely primary dad mode. So all the stories I tell on the podcast, the way people relate to me is going to be through that. And when you tell stories in that way and you lean into it, it could be like, you're mid telling a business story and you just drop a line about being a father. There's like a relatability to that you can kind of be conscious of. Don't go too far down that rabbit hole, because then you feel like everything is content, which I'm sure Hannah has felt before. But yeah, then the secondary is like, okay, these are things that I really like, but probably aren't as relatable to my content. But if people don't know this occasionally about me, I will seem like I'm only one layer deep. So maybe that's like a sport that you like or something you do in your off. Like I would consider, I know Hannah, you do a lot of art stuff, so that people probably do find you that way. But if people are coming to Piper first, I think for Hannah, like art would probably be semi-secondary.
Yeah.
Now it's more of her brand. But I think that's the kind of thing. It's like, what are the things I do for me? Running would be a secondary. I love it. You could end up in a long conversation with me about it. But if I make that top, it would be weird in a business setting to always talk about it. But it's relatable if I mentioned it every once in a while. So that has really helped me to think like I could probably have max 3 primary things right now and maybe a couple secondary that people will remember. But if I keep peppering in and I think about like stories that fit into those categories, I think about sentences, like ways that like just things that relate back to those, it like helps add, definition to who you are.
Yeah. And I keep mentioning Hormozy, but he is the king at doing stuff like that. He'll drop 5 or 6 videos about growing his company and running a business and hiring, firing, what have you. And then he'll drop, here's how to get 80 grams of protein in one meal. And that makes sense for his brand because the dude is jacked and he cares about the gym and he records business content in the gym sometimes. It just, it's all about peppering in those little details that are realistic to you and matter to you and make you a full, well-rounded, multifaceted person. It's just the quantity over time is what's going to actually allow you to do that.
Hannah, how did you come to the font choice and like, because you went over like a very good, like the big visual, like the glasses or like that kind of stuff. But some of those others that you listed there, like, do you have immediate examples that kind of come to mind? And then I love thinking about different people, even if you just think about shorts strategies right now. Mm-hmm. There's definitely some creators I follow just because I don't even care about what they're saying. I couldn't even tell you what one of the guys I follow says. He's just so cinematic in his color choice, like orange and blue always pop on the screen. And he changes where his cameras are, like probably every less than 5 seconds. And he's driving in a car most of the time. So he has all these amazing angles. And I'm obsessed with the way he filmed it.
Yeah.
But I just wonder, like, for you coming to a font decision or when you're talking about Aaron and his background, like those are things to me that are like super interesting and like how they developed for you personally. And then how you think about like things you want to try in the future or like evolve to.
Yeah. Great question. Man, font choice is so difficult to hammer down because it is, I think about fonts all the time. Like I think in fonts. But for me personally, I know that my general, visual brand or how I present online is not necessarily sleek or modern. And quite frankly, my house is not sleek or modern. One of my favorite Instagram accounts is cheap old houses. And that is the dream. But, I've paint everywhere. My place is haphazard, creative chaos. And I also love like old jazz and vintage things and old items with a story. And so understanding all of that about myself, my font choice goes back to like, okay, well, it doesn't have to be a classic old typewriter feel. But a serif font makes a lot more sense than a clean sans serif. And if it has some texture, or if I add in texture, then that's also something to consider. But yeah, it's a font I think of as like something that is all encompassing or very obvious of what is already going on elsewhere in your brand. Because there are fonts like the old Gothic fonts, they feel, I would expect you like, oh, do you sit on a throne in your day-to-day life? It's because that's the font that you're using. But, you know, you make assumptions about people based on the look of certain fonts that someone chooses. I will say that like 5 or 6 years ago, someone told me, just like out of the blue, I don't know why, I don't know if they meant this as a compliment, but I took it as one. Someone said to me, "You look like the type of person who would own a typewriter." And I just took that and ran with it, apparently. But, you know, I think I might present as someone who looks like they would own a typewriter. So my visual identifiers, my visual brand is apparently leaking out of me. Can't contain it. But when it comes to fonts, that's like, it should be an accurate representation of what is already going on in your life and in your brand elsewhere.